This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to
Welcome to the Junkyard Pod. Today we are going over roughly 15 free agency targets for the Cleveland Cavaliers to consider. This is our preview for free agency, which starts tomorrow at 6 p.m. And joining me to either endorse or reject these candidates is my co-host Jackson Flickinger. Jackson, we just had the NBA draft. Free agency is one day away. How are you feeling?
I am feeling good. I'm not feeling good after looking at the list of the free agents that you sent over, which is a pretty tough list, honestly, which is why we haven't really heard a lot of buzz about who the Cavs are targeting, because a lot of these guys suck. But the draft was interesting. Tyson wasn't a direction I expected the Cavs to go, but one of the things that I really liked that Gansey and Kobe Altman talked about afterwards is that he's one of the guys who can pass, dribble, and shoot. And I said, yes, they need guys who can pass, dribble, and shoot because they have a frighteningly low amount of guys who can do that. So you can talk me into an upside with Tyson, but we will see if he gets there and how quickly, but it should be fun to track.
Everybody wants to make moves until it's time to look at what moves are available, and that's what we're going to do today because, as you said, some of these names gets a little rough. Gets rough very quickly. There's some guys who I genuinely would be excited for, but after that, it's like, woof.
And even the guys who you would get excited for, it's like, I know people like to complain about what Max Strus did this year, but like Max Strus on this list would be number one with a bullet. So it's, yeah. I mean, it's just a bad list, honestly.
It's not great, but you know what? We do have a lot of names to get to, so we will move quickly and share our verdict on each one. Before we get started, let me just say if you enjoy the Junkyard Pod and you want to support us, all you have to do is hit subscribe, drop a like, leave a comment. Doing any of those things helps more than you realize, and it is much appreciated. Now, getting into today's episode, I actually have a few bonus players who were not originally on our list because they just became available today. So very quickly, Jackson, all you really have to do is say yes or no to these guys. Going to name 3 players, okay? Ready? Kevin Love.
I'm ready. Yes, absolutely yes. Like, this is probably the best player on this list. Like, this team needs Kevin Love so bad. Like, they need somebody who can rebound. They need somebody who can be an extra facilitator. They need somebody who actually has shooting gravity. They need somebody who understands how to play basketball and understands where they fit into a team concept. They need Kevin Love. Like, you know, Kevin Love is the best player on this list. Probably not the best player on this list, but he really fits into what this team needs. Yeah, he really fits into what this team needs. So, yes, Kevin Love. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. And let the record show, I set Jackson up for failure by saying, just give me a yes or no answer, and then gave me Kevin Love as the first option. Right, I should have known that you were going to go extended there, but I support it. Listen, they have had a glaring gap in their rotation since losing Kevin Love. And all we've been saying every time is, man, wouldn't it be nice if they had a stretch 4 who could also rebound and maybe do a little playmaking too? They haven't had that. So Kevin Love, yes, absolutely.
And bring him back. We've been so consistent about this. This podcast actually started because we wanted to complain about the Cavs letting go of Kevin Love. Like, that was the whole genesis of this thing. Not actually, but basically. So, yes, Kevin Love.
All right. Name number 2, Mo Bamba.
Sure. Whatever.
Yeah, like, I would say sure.
Yeah, I mean, they could do worse.
Trust me, they could, because the next guy on our list, Saddiq Bey.
No thanks, but they still could do worse.
Agreed. I would also say no thanks, but he is a guy where better than nothing. I guess I would rather have them get Bey than strike out completely. So wouldn't hate it. There's some guys on this list we're going to get to where I'm like, yeah, no thanks. Please do not even consider it. Saddiq Bey's a guy who, it's not my first option. It's not my 6th option, but better than someone.
I mean, it may be your 6th option, but it's not ideal.
Yeah. And so let's start running down this list that I had prepared. And it's not really in any particular order, although I kind of do have most of my favorites near the top. It'll go back and forth a little bit, but let's start with a guy who I've seen a lot of people say is number one on their board. He might be number one on my board, and that would be Jaylen Smith of the Indiana Pacers. Now, this is a 23-year-old backup big, shot 42% on threes last season. We just talked about the need to have a floor stretcher in the front court. He has experience in a rhythm-based, fast-paced offense with the Pacers. He provides that floor spacing, staggering ability we've been missing. All that aside, Smith and Allen would be the biggest and dorkiest front court in the NBA, and I'm saying that with love. So sign me up, and I would really love it. And he is a relatively mobile big. He still has upside at that age, and I'd feel comfortable calling this, when you look at the rest of this list, a home run deal if the Cavs grabbed him.
I think Jaylen Smith is one of the classic, wow, his stats look really good, but he's actually not that good of a player type of guy, where if, you're getting a guy on a second contract with your mid-level exception, it's usually because the team that has him knows why he's okay to let go, or knows why he's not worth more than a mid-level exception, or even that. And that's where I think this whole Jaylen Smith thing comes from. Like, yes, he can shoot. Yes, he can theoretically do everything. But if he was as good as his stats say, you'd think he would be a little better. But yeah, I would definitely sign up for this because he would fit in any context of the Cavs. If the Cavs trade away Jarrett Allen, he fits. If the Cavs keep Jarrett Allen, he definitely fits because he's somebody who you can say, hey, we want to just keep Mobley at the 4 full time. And this is somebody that when Allen goes to the bench, you just slide Smith in there, and it's like, hey, Evan, your role doesn't change. Like, let's really become a 4. And it also would still allow Evan Mobley to kind of operate as the 5 on offense. So I think it just checks a lot of boxes that the Cavs need. They would still need help at the wing, but, I mean, like, everyone needs help at the wing, and that's why all the wings on this list, they suck. Besides Cedi Osman. No spoilers, but...
We'll get to him. Spoiler alert. But to that point that you were saying there about the Pacers being comfortable letting Smith go, I think when you look at the Cavs and how few options they have to improving, it's kind of the situation they have to gamble on and strike gold. One man's trash is another man's treasure. There's some guys on this list that we'll get to who were considered trash a year or two ago, and another team took a chance on them and managed to revitalize them. That's the kind of ideal situation for the Cavs when you're looking at this list, which again, I don't want to just completely trash it, but it's not the most, glorious list out there. You have to hope that you find someone who is a little bit of a hidden gem.
And that's something that teams that win championships do. If you look at the Celtics, like, nobody before, like, last trade deadline, like trade deadline 2023, nobody thought Derrick White was the linchpin to a championship team. People thought Derrick White was better than Jaylen Smith, so don't get that confused. But nobody thought he was like an all-defensive type guy, somebody who could really just make everything click, and he did. And he's on a decent contract, so you can, he fits in perfectly. So that's where it's like, you can find those guys, but the Cavs need to find that guy. Whether or not that's Jaylen Smith is, certainly an open question.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. Moving on to our next name here, that would be Taurean Prince. Now, there was a report about a month ago that he's 100% looking to re-sign with the Lakers, so this might be something that's just completely off the board already. Who knows? Maybe Bronny pushes him out and takes his spot. But if the Cavs could convince him, you get a 6'6" forward, he can handle the ball, create separation, he can knock down a variety of shots. I don't think you can have enough of those in today's NBA. So he would be an easy fit for this team. Again, he's not a huge needle mover, and I also don't think he'll be available, but he is one of the better names on this list.
He is definitely one of the better names on this list, and when I talk about guys who have better stats than who they actually are, like, watch the Lakers play, you were never like, they need 2 or 3 more Taurean Princes. You were like, why is Taurean Prince on the court? And he was a 39.6% three-point shooter last year. So it's, he's fine. He gives you a little bit of versatility. He can play some 4 in a pinch, but if Taurean Prince is closing games for you at the 4, that's usually shows that there's other holes on your roster, or he's having like an unbelievably good game. Taurean Prince was on the Cavs before, and he played really good. But also, he was somebody who the Cavs were okay with moving on from, even though they desperately needed wings then, just like they do now. And there was a reason why that was the case. So I wouldn't be doing backflips because the Cavs got Taurean Prince, but he's fine. He's better than some of these other options that we're going to go through.
Yeah, as we've said a couple times, you could do worse. You could do worse than Taurean Prince. But again, I don't really expect him to be a realistic option, but he was worth talking about. Another guy, sorry to start off this way, but another guy who probably isn't a super realistic option is Derrick Jones Jr., and that's just because I can't imagine Dallas will let him go. And I also can't really imagine that he would want to change scenery after he finally finds a role in the NBA. He has some success. I don't know why he would want to start from scratch, and I don't think the Dallas Mavericks plan on letting him go. With that said, uber athletic, versatile defender. He turned into a reasonable shooter, can handle the ball a little bit. Just a connective piece that was a huge part of that finals run for Dallas. And so it's easy to see how he would be a huge upgrade maybe he's pushing it, but an upgrade for this Cavs rotation. Probably not happening, but he is someone who I would get on board with.
He's a kind of the opposite of what we were saying with some of these other guys. He's actually like a better player than his stats would indicate. He's not that good of a three-point shooter. Comparatively, a career 316, 31.6% from three. Last season, 34%, which is okay. But he does a lot of other things, which is something the Cavs could use. So I think that if we were to go off of wings, I think that he may be the best wing on this list that we have. But he's still not a, guy that you are just like, okay, he solves all of our answers at the three. He's kind of like a more athletic, not as much of a shooter version of Max Strus, which, the Cavs could use.
Yeah, I mean, that's the best way to put it. They could use a Derrick Jones Jr. I don't think they'll be able to get him, but that's kind of the bar that's being set here is like, can they find a guy on this free agency list who they could genuinely use? Moving into our next guy, and I got to start off with an apology. I owe Kelly Oubre an apology because I was a non-believer, and I think he proved me wrong with a pretty decent season in Philly. Now, let's not get completely carried away. He still did bring some of the same problems that have always plagued him, but the dude played hard. He gave valuable production on both ends of the floor, and it's easy to see how the Cavs could use a player of his size and skill set. Now, let's point this out. He shot 31% on three-pointers last season. He's a career 32% shooter. For whatever reason, he gets the reputation on Twitter of being like a competent floor spacer. It's not really the case. He's kind of a shot chucker, but, teams will gladly let him shoot the ball. But for the Cavs, again, player that size, a true wing, versatile player, you could use him. I'm not personally signing up for him, and I imagine that the 76ers wouldn't want to let him go either, but where are you at with Kelly Oubre? Because this is a guy who I owed him an apology to start off.
I think it's with Kelly Oubre, it's always about the price that you're paying for him. He's somebody who I think it's easy to overpay, and if you were to use like a full mid-level on Kelly Oubre, you don't really like that too much. But if you were to get him at a much cheaper contract, and I'm not entirely sure what the Sixers got him at, but I think they got him pretty cheap, correct? Or do you have that information?
So. I don't have the.
I don't think it was much. I don't think it was much more than the minimum, which makes it like a home run deal. But if you're giving him $12 million, and it's probably the last time the Cavs are going to have the full mid-level exception, you're probably not loving that, and that's something that you're going to be like, I don't know about this. So I would have him underneath my Derrick Jones Jr. on this list. Like, the Cavs could do worse, but you're going to be a little disappointed by Kelly Oubre if you give him that much money.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to bet on Kelly Oubre being like a legit rotational piece on a playoff contending team. He's very streaky, very inconsistent in his effort and his contributions. And so I've said this a billion times, the Cavs, they have enough streakiness and inconsistency on the roster. I would rather go for a guy who, moving into our next name here, Haywood Highsmith. a relatively consistent player for the Miami Heat. Another guy who sounds like he's probably going to be staying right where he is, but things change fast in the NBA. You never know. I see why Miami would want to retain him. He's athletic. He's got good size, very solid defender. He's versatile. Shot almost 40% from three last season. He's an impactful player in basically any lineup. I think this would be a somewhat, when you're looking at the list, a dream fit for the Cavs, but it's probably more of a pipe dream at this point because I don't think Miami is going to let him walk.
Yeah, I think it would be a good fit. I would almost, at the 4, I almost would rather have somebody who's a really high volume 3-point shooter as opposed to somebody who can do a little bit of shooting. But yeah, I think that you could do worse than this, and I think this would be a good signing. I don't know if, again, like none of these people are getting me really excited, but yeah, he would fill a need and gives you kind of that 3-4 type person, and that's somebody the Cavs have 1-3-4 in Dean Wade, and he can't stay on the court. So I think they desperately need a 3-4. Some of their 4s are more 4-5s, or just 4 bads. In the case of some people. So it's just like, yeah, they could definitely use this guy.
Yeah, he would just be a reliable player who you could trust to be out there. Moving into our next guy, Robert Covington. And I just want to start off with a question. At what point does Robert Covington shed his reputation? I feel like he's held the belt as the NBA's premier 3-and-D role player for like a decade at this point. And I think his run is finally, it's come to an end last year, if not earlier than that. He was injured all of last season at 33. That's more of a concern than an excuse. I guess I'll just say this. If he's available for cheap, I'm talking like a veteran minimum deal, then sure, sign me up. But I mean, the Cavs just have some unserious basketball players on the roster right now. I'm looking at George Niang, and if you could be more serious than that guy, you are worthy of a contract in my eyes. But I think it's time to let Robert Covington go.
Let's not get carried away there, because you're opening the door. You're opening the door to so many names at that point. Just kidding.
True.
But
I mean, it's kind of valid. I think I would actually take almost everyone on this list over Niang, but that's neither here nor there.
I mean, Gordon Hayward.
That one gets tricky.
The
good news is you can just not play Hayward. Niang, for some reason, you're playing him. So.
Well, that's a whole separate issue, but Robert Covington. I think probably that Portland contract feels like or the Portland trade. That feels like when he kind of lost that label, when it kind of was like, all right, we're like Robert Covington's gonna like sure everything up, and it's like I'm just kind of a decent role player. I'm not actually like the savior of any of these teams. And yeah, he's going into his age 34 season. He hasn't played 29 games last year, played 48 games the year before, played 42 games the year before. He's not staying on the court after he's hit 30. So, that's not really who the Cavs should be looking for. Maybe he's healthy. Maybe he's still, when he's healthy, he's giving you decent production, but that's just not really who he's been, and he's not the type of versatile defender that he kind of got the reputation of being earlier in his career.
Yeah, I think it's time to let Robert Covington go. A guy who's somewhat similar in this sense would be Nic Batum. Now, he's still one of the best glue guys, role players in the NBA. I just don't feel comfortable with how much gas he has left in the tank. I continue to be surprised by how much he was still operating at a high level for a role player. I'm like, I can't believe it. And look, there's rumors that he might retire this summer. And so because of all that, I would probably just avoid this situation. Still, he's a fantastic connective piece to have on a team that doesn't have many connectors. He can do a little bit of everything. The problem is there's a lot of mileage on him, and it sounds like he's on his way out.
Yeah, he's going to be going into his age 36 season, which is quite old for basically any basketball player. So that's, he doesn't give you the positional versatility that I think he was really known for 4 or 5 years ago, where you could be a 3-4, and now he's really just a 4, which again, the Cavs need, so it's not like the Cavs don't need it, but it all comes back to the price. Like if you were to get him on a veteran minimum contract or something like that, I think you'd be really happy about that if you're using a decent portion of your mid-level exception on him. You're going to be asking yourself why did we do that? So because if you look at the team that he was on, like Philadelphia needs 3 4s too, and if Nic Batum was some kind of answer there, or they were comfortable feeling that he was that kind of answer there, they would keep him. Like, this is kind of where a lot of these guys on this list fall. So it's like, I don't, no thank you.
Yeah, you said it perfectly there. For this next guy, I'm going to let you just take the reins here. Cedi Osman, Jackson. How do you feel about him? No one knows.
Would love to welcome Cedi Osman home. I think that Cedi Osman got too short of a leash with JB Bickerstaff. That's, my number one complaint with JB. Not actually, but maybe. Yeah, I think Cedi Osman does a lot of things that can be useful. We all know the downsides with Cedi. I don't really need to get completely into it, but I think downsides? Not in my mind, but that's I think one of the problems that the Cavs had with Cedi the last time his last go around is that they didn't really have any other options, which made it kind of, you're too reliant on Cedi, you're too reliant on, like, he was the only guy who, like, Cedi's not a movement shooter, but he was your closest approximation to a movement shooter on that team, which is kind of not a role you really want Cedi in. So I think if you put him in a role where, you put him next to Max Strus, you put him next to a Sam Merrill, where he's more operating as like a secondary playmaker and kind of attacking in transition and giving you energy, I think he makes a lot more sense than he did on the last Cavs team that we saw. And I think Atkinson could be somebody who puts him into better positions to succeed. Hopefully you're playing him with another point guard, which I think that's also some of the issues that, like, a lot of the issues that the Cavs ran into with Cedi is they miscast him into roles that he shouldn't be in. Like, Cedi, why don't you be the point guard for this team? Cedi, why don't you be the stretch four? It's like, these aren't really positions for him. Cedi, why don't you be our movement shooter? Like, that's not really what you should have Cedi being. Cedi should be an off-ball guy who can do some playmaking, can do some cutting, can provide some hustle, and really in like a 15 to 20 minute role, as opposed to a 4-minute to 35-minute role, which, and it was never like in between 4 and 35. It was either like he's playing 4 minutes or he's playing like 35 minutes. So, I think this is a better situation for him than the previous one.
I think it's a better situation for him. A more defined role, a more consistent role. He's not looking over his shoulder every time he misses a shot. And now, look, I was on record saying that I would have loved to keep Cedi last summer. It became necessary for them to take a swing on someone like Strus. And if Cedi was the price to get Strus, I think you had to pay that price. But if we want to do Return of the King, we can get him back in the land. There'd be no complaints from me. He's still a player with actual wing size, microwave shooter. He can handle the ball. He's a good connective piece in the NBA. He's never going to be quite as good as you want him to be, but he will have his moments. And for the love of God, just compare the joy that he brought to Cleveland to whatever Niang gave us last season and tell me you don't want Cedi back.
Yeah, I think kind of the argument against Cedi is he's a 3. He's a 3. I think he's definitely a 3, but he may be more comfortable as a 2. And there's a lot of guys on this roster who are 3-2s, which is tough. Like, they even drafted another one. So that's where it's like, if you wanted to push back against the Cedi thing, I think that's the best argument against it. But then we looked at this list. What are we trying to do? Like Nic Batum? Like, it's a tough list. It's a bad list. So, yeah.
Cedi's up there near the top, and that's genuinely not even me being a biased Cavs fan. If you're just looking at this list, he is actually one of the better options here. So, jokes aside, fandom aside, I would be down for Cedi.
Yeah, and if you're looking at just 3s, because I think the best option on this list is like Jaylen Smith, or like I would rather have a Kevin Love reunion than a Cedi Osman reunion, honestly. But like, if you're not getting Jaylen Smith, if you're not getting Kevin Love, if you want to get a 3, like, this is where to get one. I don't know. It's like, it's just it's not good people. Like, that's the main takeaway.
Yeah, we're going to keep saying it, I'm sure, because we haven't even gotten to the players who are truly not good. And I'm not putting this player in this category. Our next guy, Kyle Anderson, he's a guy I could get on board with. The problem is he's not really a great fit. He is a power forward in today's NBA. He's a slow, methodical player. I think he would work well in Kenny Atkinson's motion offense because he's a great passer. For a 6'9" forward, he can cut, open up teammates, handle the ball. He would be a nice fit in that regard, but his lack of shooting makes it awkward.
Yeah.
That's probably the deal breaker. I mean, he is a non-threat from out there. And it also sounds like Minnesota wants him back. So he's a player who I would have on my radar, but it's just not a perfect fit anywhere.
Yeah, I think Kyle Anderson is a lot better of a player than a lot of the names that we mentioned today, but he doesn't really fit with what the Cavs need. So
yeah, he's the first player who fits that too, where it's like he's a good player, but it doesn't make sense for the Cavs.
Right. You don't, like, the last thing you need is a 4 who can't shoot, because we have a 4 who can't shoot and he plays like a lot. So and he's not somebody who you can play at the 5 either. So he's like the 3-4, which the Cavs need more 3-4s, but they need more 3-4s that are closer to the Dean Wade than, this model.
Yeah, he's just not an archetype that the Cavs really need right now.
22% from 3 on 0.6 attempts per game. Like, that's not what you want.
Not good. It's actually a lot worse than I thought it was too.
Yeah,
I thought it was a little better than that, but yeah, I'd have to pass on Kyle Anderson. Another guy who might surprise people. I'm just gonna say this is an automatic no for me. Now there's some context where I could be convinced. Buddy Hield, he's a great motion shooter, provides a ton of offensive juice for a team that lacks offensive juice, but there is a reason why actual NBA teams have never really been as interested in Buddy Hield as the general fan bases have been. He's a complete liability on defense, and that puts a serious cap on how much you can play him in big moments. Combine that with him being 6'4", and it's just a no for me. Now, the one exception I'll provide: if you trade Darius Garland and you don't get a guard in return, I'm not saying play Buddy Hield at point guard, but if you don't get any sort of guard in return,
that's provocative.
I would consider adding Hield to the rotation. I think he actually is a wonderful fit next to Donovan Mitchell in a Mitchell heliocentric offense. Again, I wouldn't do it, but if you traded Garland and you needed someone, I could see the thought process there.
I like Buddy Hield.
So do
I don't know if I like him. Like, the problem with Buddy Hield is he's a 2, and you have 2 3s, you have 2 2s as well. You have a lot of them, and they need shooting, but I don't think they need shooting that they can put on the floor, and I'm not sure where you find room for Buddy Hield in this rotation. Or at least, is Buddy Hield better than Sam Merrill? I think the answer is yes, but is Buddy Hield at $12 million and your mid-level exception better than Sam Merrill at $3 million or whatever he is on an unguaranteed contract? I don't think so. So that's where it's like, yeah, and the Cavs can't find minutes for Sam Merrill anyways. So that's that's where it's like, yeah, I don't know. If you don't have Garland, I think it's a little easier, but he still wouldn't really fill a need because they still would need another guard, like another actual point guard. Yeah, and Buddy Hield can be a decent secondary playmaker, but you have decent secondary playmakers. So if you traded Darius Garland, it's like, well, Karis LeVert's a decent secondary playmaker, and he's a better decent secondary playmaker than Buddy Hield. So I don't know. It's just a bad fit.
Yeah. Well, here's a question, and a complete hypothetical. In a vacuum, would you rather have Buddy Hield or Max Strus on this team?
Max Strus.
Yeah, I agree, because he does other things.
Well, and you're more comfortable with him playing the 3.
Yeah, you're more comfortable with him playing the 3. He can hold
he's
up defensively.
He's a really good rebounder.
Good rebounder.
So, you can get away with, we're closing with, depending on who else is on the floor, you can get away with closing with Max Strus at the 4. You're not getting away with Buddy Hield doing that, and you may not even be getting away with him. Well, you could get away with him closing at the 3 in some situations, but
Some situations.
it's just really tough because, you know, if the Cavs lost Isaac Okoro in restricted free agency, I think that you could talk yourself into Buddy Hield a lot easier because you would have more of a hole in that 2-3 situation. And I think you could say, okay, yeah, we can play Buddy Hield at the 3 but yeah, it's still not really what you want or need.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, listen, Buddy Hield's an absolute lights out pure shooter. It's just not something that he's a specialist, and the Cavs, they don't need any more specialists at this point. Another guy who fits that, I would say, is Malik Beasley, another 6'4" guy, great shooter. He would give them a much needed offensive jolt in certain scenarios. But on top of what we already said about Buddy Hield, I just don't think you can afford any players below 6'5" anymore. It's kind of a non-negotiable. And he's not quite good enough to make me change my mind about that. If there was a really, really good player who is 6'4.5", yeah, go get him. But
Right.
that's not Malik Beasley.
Yeah, and he's like if he was that valuable, he's the type of guy that the Bucks would do everything possible to keep. And I know the Bucks are in obviously a tough cap situation and everything, but it's just he's probably not worth it for this team just because of all the things that you said and the things that we basically said about Healed.
Yeah, and he's
like I'd rather have him over Healed. I think that's pretty clear, but
he's a little more versatile.
Yeah, you can kind of see him fitting in a little better, but it's not. Yeah, it's just tough because they have
most of the guys on this list ahead of him.
I mean, but you're not happy about taking most of the guys on the list ahead of him.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of the guys, sure, but Malik Beasley, just not a great fit. Speaking of guys who are short, the shortest player on our list would be Tyus Jones. And you know what? He's on the list for one reason, and it's because, well, two reasons. The Cavs could use a backup point guard. I think we're all hoping Ty Jerome exists and is a player who can, be on the court next year. But if they trade Darius Garland, well, now you absolutely need a traditional point guard. And Jones is one of the best in the business in terms of like being that traditional role-playing point guard. So this is entirely contingent on the future of Darius Garland. There's really no reason to consider this if DG is on the roster, but I thought he was worth tossing on here.
I think the Cavs could use a backup point guard maybe more than you do. Even if Darius Garland is on the roster, I think you would be more comfortable with having a little more depth there, with having more defined roles for guys like Darius Garland, not Darius Garland, with guys like Donovan Mitchell and Karis LeVert. I think they would probably both benefit from that. He's somebody who can provide some shooting, which is really helpful as well. So I would much rather this type of player as opposed to a Malik Beasley type player where you're like, he can fit into certain things, but not super cleanly. Whereas Tyus Jones has a really defined role. He's somebody who I think would instantly be in your top 8 rotation and would genuinely help. So I would be more okay with this than most other people on the list.
Yeah, you know what? I do agree with you there. I think Tyus, he is just a super reliable, high IQ player. You can trust him to be on the floor. And when you look at the Cavs the last few years, they just don't have many guys, especially their supporting players, who you can genuinely trust to be on the floor and not tank things. And so I see the argument for Tyus there.
And he would be really valuable if Darius or Donovan got hurt again, because that's obviously they performed quite well without Darius last year. We don't need to get into that completely, but it would have made a lot more sense if you could have had Tyus Jones with the backup unit, or even if you had Tyus Jones playing with Darius Garland more when Donovan was out. I guess it kind of goes back to how much you believe in Craig Porter Jr. I
was going to say that.
I'm much more skeptical That was not how you pronounce that word. I was much more skeptical of Craig Porter Jr. than I think most of the Cavs fan bases. I think Craig Porter Jr. is solid, but I don't know if he's really. I don't know what the next step is for Craig Porter Jr. if there's a player that's better than the one that we saw out there. His shot is a huge question mark. We saw teams really, really back off of him the second half of the year. He had a plague. No, we can't come near Craig Porter Jr. when he's on the perimeter because, we don't want to get what he has. And there was some really questionable playmaking out of him. I think in the open court, you really like what Craig Porter Jr. brings, but in the half court, after the first 2 or 3 months of the season, it was really not great. And because of the way teams started to shift how they guarded him, the finishing at the rim, which is what he was really good at, really dried up. So I don't know if Craig Porter Jr. is much better than what we saw last season.
Yeah, and as as the leader, the founder of the Craig Porter fan club, I do agree with what you mentioned. In the second half of the year, we do need to be honest, not nearly as effective as the start of the year. Once the scout was out on him, teams realized he can't shoot the ball. It got really rough.
Speaking of being honest, we need to have an honest conversation about your fan club starting. Because you can't start a fan club and be like the president of 900 different fan clubs.
Why not?
You gotta, because it's just not genuine. Nobody, you gotta have a guy. If it was Isaac Okoro, he's my guy, and
He's
nothing else matters. If everyone's your guy, then no one's your guy. So we need to clean this up, okay? If you said,
all right, I'll have to give you a list of my guys, and you can tell me which fan bases I need to remove myself from. Can I just be a part of fan clubs? I don't have to be the president. Can I just be on the island?
Yeah. You can definitely we're hanging out here, but you can't be I'm driving the Sam Merrill train. You're not driving the Craig Porter Jr. train because you're trying to drive 10 other trains. You can only drive, 1, maybe 2 trains.
I would say at the start, up until about January, I was firmly driving that Craig Porter train, and then I kind of hopped off. You are still driving the Sam Merrill train. I'll give you credit.
Yeah, well,
I'm
because
on the train with you. I'm just not driving it.
Yeah, so if you're driving it, you don't leave the train. Hey, we're going into the side of a mountain. That sucks, but this is my choice. I never jumped off the Jetty bandwagon. It was you know what, Jetty got cooked by Jalen Brunson there, and it was actually, I think he had some good contests. I think the help defense was kind of bad. Honestly, I think that's where we went wrong. So that's what the people who are driving the train, that's what they say. They come up with, they're spinning things. They're the presidential press secretary. Where they're just they're just spinning all these bad things. No, this is actually really good. And if you were driving a train or leader of a fan club, that's what you should be doing. That's not what you're doing. You're just a fair weather bandwagon hopper.
Wow, this is crazy. Well, I will say, if at any point I was the one driving the Karis LeVert train, I would just tell everyone to get off because no one is at the wheel anymore. So get off while you still can. Jackson called me out on my band.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll make a list, and we will go over which islands I am a resident and which islands I am the president. We'll get to that.
I think the last one that you really could say that you were the president of was the Dylan Windler one, because you still believe Dylan Windler.
There weren't many people claiming the throne on that.
Yeah, so that's where I would say that, hey, that's a good example of that. But Karis LeVert, as soon as he turned it over twice in a game, sending texts to the Fear the Sword group dude, Karis LeVert sucks, man. And it's
sometimes he does.
You never get a text. There's never been a text in there from the group saying, Cedi Osman, Sam Merrill, those guys suck. It's more what, I think that the situation isn't what it needs to be right now, and I think everybody else needs to step up around my guy.
You know what? I respect it, Jackson. I respect it. You ride or die for Cedi in a way that I think maybe only Evan Mobley gets that type of appreciation from me. Couldn't even say Darius because I have been hard on Darius. Evan Mobley is like my precious. I don't let any criticism of
I
Evan
don't
Mobley
think you
fly.
can. I don't think you can do it for a
Player of that
superstar.
caliber. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the
because
issue.
it's just a little tougher. Like it needs to be like a legit role player. So I think that like Dean Wade, somebody who you could do that for. Isaac Okoro.
Mm,
Isaac Okoro may not be good
Okoro,
enough
I'm
for
up
you to
there.
do that for.
Yeah. Anyways, we only
Okay.
have 2 names left on our list, so we
They're
can
bad
round
names.
this out. They're
Nobody
bad names.
wants.
We're basically gonna pass on them.
I guess
pretty
they're not
quickly.
bad names, but
Doug McDermott. Look, I said it earlier. We don't need any more specialists. We got enough of them. He's a nice addition. I'd rather have him than nothing. I'd rather have
Sure.
him than completely striking out. But he doesn't move the needle in any meaningful way, so I'm good on him. I'm assuming you agree.
yeah.
A name that we. Oh, sorry,
I
go
mean,
ahead.
okay, so if you were really to go all in on the Evan Mobley is your center, I think he'd be a decent backup power forward. He's better. I'd rather have him than a George Niang. So maybe don't want to dismiss it completely right away, but
That's fair.
it's not a good upgrade, and he's not a good rebounder, which is really what the Cavs need. Like if you're gonna go with a shooter at the 4, they need to be able to get a freaking rebound. And Doug McDermott's not the guy getting rebounds. George Niang's not the guy getting rebounds. Which brings us back to option A. Kevin Love. He gets rebounds.
Yeah, he sure does. I would love Kevin Love back in Cleveland. A guy who was on our list originally, who he just agreed to return to Phoenix, is Royce O'Neal. I was out on him anyway. Just figured I'd mention him. The last guy.
I mean,
Go ahead.
I was good with Royce O'Neal. I think that's a good option. It's somebody that Donovan Mitchell actually likes, and maybe somebody that he likes that can push out somebody else that he likes. So you didn't really think about that. So
we could replace one best friend with a better best friend.
Right, like kind of like if you're like a roommate in college and you're rooming with your friend and then another friend moves in, it's like, oh, this guy actually is my best friend. Like the old guy, he leaves dishes in the sink. Really, actually, there's a lot of things I don't like about him. So, and I think maybe you had the potential to do that with Royce O'Neal, but
okay, I see your logic there.
He signed with the Suns today, so he's not an option.
Yeah.
Just to clarify.
Another guy who I'm going to just the biggest and most absolute hell no on the list here is Gordon Hayward. Listen, he's washed up. He's as washed up as it gets. I will gladly deal with a freezing cold take if I'm proven wrong, but he's got nothing left. He's cooked. He's done. Cavs should have nothing to do with him. The idea of Hayward, glorious fit in Cleveland, but I have no faith that he's that guy anymore.
Like
it's not happening.
The bad version of Gordon Hayward, or like what you think the bad version or the aged out version of the Boston Celtics Gordon Hayward, he would be a perfect fit, but he has not aged well, and he's just very bad at basketball. I don't know if he still does Twitch. Maybe he can provide some good content along with some of the other Cavs content creators on the team. So maybe that's a possibility, but we're not really interested in the content anyway. It's not good content. So, no, we're out.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm out. I'm not really.
You don't need to apologize. Like, why are you apologizing for this? This isn't like you're not saying, you know what, I'm out on LeBron James returning. Like, I think maybe you would have to apologize for that, or like if you had to say like, you know what, Kevin Love's a franchise legend, but I'm not interested in a reunion. Like, yeah, maybe you could apologize for that. But you don't need to apologize
for that.
You don't need to apologize for Gordon Hayward.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that said, I'm not sorry then.
Don't be sorry.
That is going to do it for this episode of the Junkyard Pod. Jackson, thank you as always for helping me break all of this down, and thank you to whoever watched or listened to this episode.
Who can you give me your top 3 on this list?
Top 3? Yeah, that's a good idea. We should end it with that. I'm gonna go. Are we counting the Kevin Love as an honorable mention here? Throw him in there.
Yeah.
I'll go Jaylen Smith. This isn't in order. Jaylen Smith, Kevin Love. And then Derrick Jones, even though I don't think he'll be an option. So if that's cheating, I will go with Cedi or Taurean Prince. You could convince me Kelly Oubre as well.
Yeah, so I would first go, the first two are the same. And then really Derrick Jones Jr. I think would be a good fit, even though we highlighted some of the issues. I mean, Cedi's actually the number one choice, so don't forget that. But
your fandom was in question there for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, he is the number one choice. For sure. Like, for my enjoyment, I would enjoy watching the Cavaliers more if Cedi Osman was there. Mm-hmm. And talk about Donovan Mitchell best friends. Like Donovan and Cedi. That's the best friend that pushes the other friend out of the lineup. Cedi number one. Jaylen Smith, who cares?
Cedi needs to come in and reclaim his position. All right. He was wrongfully ousted. He was replaced by someone who everyone hates. He needs to come in and reclaim.
It's like the French Revolution. Sorry, not. The one king goes, but then once we get rid of the other king, you get the king from exile. You get him back here. He's been living somewhere in England. Just get him back.
He'll come back. I make too many Dune references, so I was trying not to do it, but I did make the Dune reference on Twitter. He's like Paul Atreides coming back from the dead and defeating the Baron. I'm all for Cedi coming back. I'll also throw Mo Bamba in there as well. We didn't mention him really much other than that honorable mention. He's a good fit in Cleveland.
Great song.
Great song as well. So I think that's it. I think that's going to do it for this episode. If you enjoyed, please consider hitting subscribe, dropping a like. You know the drill by now. We appreciate it. And follow us on Twitter while you're at it. The free agency floodgates open up tomorrow, and we will have coverage right here on this channel, as well on Fear the Sword on our Twitter page. So you don't want to miss it. With all that being said, go Cavs.
I agree. Go Cavs. Brian, who is your favorite free agent on this list?